There is a code name for the quiet campaign aimed at bringing Harry and King Charles back together. That code name is Project Thor, and the journalist who was perhaps the most publicly doubtful that it even existed, who spent months brushing off reconciliation signals as carefully managed PR designed to create headlines without delivering anything meaningful, has changed his view. Not with a dramatic public U-turn or a loud declaration, but in the way reporters change their minds when the evidence stops looking accidental and begins to resemble deliberate coordination between two highly sophisticated operations. Tom Sykes noticed something very specific. The messages emerging from Harry's camp and the messages coming from the king's office were appearing simultaneously, moving in the same direction, calibrated in a manner that simply does not happen when two sides are acting independently. When two separate, powerful, and politically experienced offices release coordinated signals within the same window, pointing toward the same outcome, that is not coincidence or parallel thinking. That is an operation working from a plan. Project Thor, according to Sykes' assessment after months of skepticism, now appears to be real. Tonight, we are examining what Project Thor is actually trying to achieve and why it needs a code name in the first place. We will look at Tom Bower's specific sourced claims in his 2026 book Betrayal regarding what William has decided and when that decision was made, the reported $3 million annual baseline of the Sussex lifestyle, and what the question of title removal means in practical commercial terms rather than ceremonial ones, and Meghan's reported consideration of legal action if her title were removed, a decision that is financial as much as it is personal. The question linking all of these issues together is the same question that has existed from the start, the one that has sat at the center of every Sussex story since 2020. What happens when William becomes king and gains the full constitutional authority to carry out what he has already decided? And according to Bower, drawing on current and former senior aides from both the King's office and the Prince of Wales's office, the answer to that question was settled at a specific time on a specific day. The decision has already been made. The only thing that has not yet arrived is the moment when it can be put into effect. Let's begin with Project Thor, because it is both the least reported and potentially the most important development in the reconciliation story. Understanding it requires understanding the unique pressure created by Charles's health situation. The king is managing a cancer diagnosis that has not entered remission. He has undergone treatment, and as his response improved, the intensity of that treatment was reduced. But the cancer has not been declared resolved, and the palace has been careful not to present it as such. He is 76 years old. Throughout his adult life, he has thought about what the institution demands and what those demands cost. Over the last 5 years, he has watched his family fracture in ways that were public, documented, and commercially leveraged by one side. And despite all of that, he has not given up on the son who played a central role in much of it. That reality is what makes Project Thor necessary. If William's position were less firmly established, reconciliation could take place through ordinary back channels without the need for a code name. If Harry's operation were less commercially driven, the conditions for a meeting could be created without such careful coordination. The operation exists because the gap between what Charles wants, a meeting with his younger son before his health situation changes, and what William is willing to tolerate without public resistance is extremely narrow. Moving through that space requires careful orchestration rather than open negotiation. Sykes' observation was precise and based on pattern recognition rather than instinct. The timing of the signals coming from both sides was simply too coordinated to be accidental. Harry's camp signals openness. The King's office signals availability. Both messages emerge in the same period, moving at the same pace and toward the same conclusion. That is not two sides independently deciding to be reasonable. That is two sides agreeing on an approach and carrying it out in parallel. William's office, notably, says nothing. That silence is not neutral. Given everything William has already communicated about his position, the absence of comment from his office during a period when the other two camps are signaling reconciliation becomes a message in itself. He knows what is happening. He is choosing not to publicly challenge a back-channel process. He cannot be seen openly blocking it without risking the appearance of preventing his father from seeing his son while that father is battling cancer. That is a position that would create sympathy for Harry and impose a political cost on William. So William remains silent. He says nothing, and he waits. Whether Project Thor ultimately produces an actual meeting, a physical encounter between Harry and Charles rather than simply coordinated signals of intent, is the question no one outside the operation can answer right now. No confirmed meeting has been reported, and the lack of that confirmation is itself revealing. It offers a clue about how much progress these carefully coordinated signals have actually achieved. The signals suggest continued intent. The obstacles, however, remain significant. If Hollywood today is giving you the context that other channels leave out, hitting the like button costs nothing and helps keep this channel running. Now, let's turn to Tom Bower's book because Betrayal, his 2026 follow-up to Revenge, includes a chapter on William that, in Bower's own view, represents one of the most significant pieces of reporting about the future direction of the British monarchy, published in recent years. And the Sussex response to it is almost as revealing as the book itself. When Betrayal was released, the Sussex camp reportedly dismissed it as a deranged conspiracy. As we've discussed before on this channel, that is not the same thing as a denial. A genuine denial addresses specifics. It says this date is incorrect. This document never existed. This source is fabricated. Calling something a deranged conspiracy attacks the author rather than engaging with any particular claim. The palace has not challenged the book in court. The Sussex operation has not issued a formal legal dispute against any individual factual allegation. The book remains available with its central claims untouched by either legal action or direct factual rebuttal. Bower's track record is part of why this matters. He was the journalist who exposed Robert Maxwell's pension scandal before major publications were prepared to publish it. He also dismantled much of Gordon Brown's political mythology, using source-backed reporting while Brown was still serving in office. His standard has always been clear. He insists on writing only what he believes can be supported, and he maintains the legal resources necessary to defend that reporting. His 2022 book on Harry and Meghan drew from approximately 80 separate sources. 80 individuals willing to speak with a biographer known for extensive sourcing and a long-established reputation for accuracy. Betrayal appears to rely on individuals described as current and former senior aides from both the King's office and the Prince of Wales's office. These are people inside the institutional structure itself, not outside observers offering commentary. The chapter centered on William contains several specific claims that remain publicly uncontested. According to Bower's reporting, William is prepared to act decisively when he becomes king. The decision to take that approach was reportedly made at a specific moment. The timing matters. Bower's sources suggest that this realization occurred on the same day William was preparing to extend a coronation invitation to Harry, while Harry was simultaneously excluded from the more intimate palace reception honoring the late Queen. Two developments unfolding on the same day, pulling in opposite directions. That contrast appears to have crystallized something. According to Bower's sources, William made a calculation and has not revisited it since. The most consequential claim, and it is important to remember that this remains sourced reporting, rather than a confirmed statement of intent, is that William's long-term planning may include the removal of titles not only from Harry and Meghan, but also from Archie and Lilibet. Archie is 7 years old. Lilibet is 5. Bower presents this not as an emotional response driven by resentment, but as part of a broader strategic assessment focused on institutional clarity. In this telling, it forms part of a larger restructuring that William would seek to implement using the constitutional authority of the crown once that authority becomes his. The public consequences of removing titles from young children would be substantial and would cut in both directions. On one side, it would almost certainly generate immediate sympathy for Harry and Meghan, including among audiences who currently have little sympathy for them. Questions would inevitably arise about whether the monarchy should be exercising its authority in a way that affects children. It would dominate headlines and could quickly become the defining story of William's early reign. On the other side, it would create exactly the commercial impact that William's reported analysis appears to focus on. It would remove the central branding asset from an operation whose business model is built around that asset. Whether William would ultimately go that far is impossible to know until the moment arrives. But according to Bauer's sourcing, the possibility exists within current planning discussions, and neither palace has issued a public statement directly disputing that claim. Subscribe to Hollywood Today so you don't miss what we cover next, and leave your thoughts in the comments, especially regarding the Archie and Lilibet question. Do you believe William would actually remove titles from minor children? Or is this one of those decisions that looks very different when viewed from inside the institution than it does from the outside looking in? Now let's move to the title issue itself, because this is where the discussion stops being symbolic and becomes practical. This is not primarily a ceremonial question. It is the structural support underneath the entire Sussex commercial enterprise. Royal titles are not decorative accessories. Within the framework Harry and Meghan have built since 2020, they function as the foundation. The commercial value attached to everything the Sussexes have created, the Netflix agreement, the Spotify deal, the memoir, the lifestyle brand, the speaking engagements, the partnerships, ultimately rests on a single underlying asset: their connection to the British monarchy as represented through their titles, not independent creative output, not content production skills, not Meghan's acting background or Harry's military service, the institutional association itself, the words Prince, Duke, and Duchess. The titles that appear in every negotiation, every press announcement, every product launch, and every media description explaining who they are and why they command attention. Remove the title, and the entire commercial equation changes. The Netflix agreement was valued around the Sussex brand, around the idea of access to a prince and duchess who could speak about the royal family from an insider perspective. It becomes a very different proposition if the people presenting it are simply Harry and Meghan Markle from Montecito, California. The memoir attracted the level of commercial interest it did because it was the memoir of a prince. The lifestyle brand maintains its premium image because its founder carries the title of Duchess. Every major revenue stream contains that title at its core. Bauer's reporting includes a figure that has circulated widely and notably has not been publicly disputed. According to that reporting, the Sussex operation requires roughly $3 million annually to maintain the lifestyle and infrastructure currently in place. That figure represents the baseline before discretionary spending enters the picture. Security, properties, legal advisors and public relations teams, brand management, the travel infrastructure required to operate at their current level. Approximately $3 million each year simply to keep the existing system functioning as it does today. No expansion, no new projects, no additional growth, just maintaining what is already there. Against that $3 million foundation, the commercial performance of the Sussex operation has reportedly been shrinking across multiple areas at the same time. The Netflix arrangement evolved from an equity-based structure into a first-look agreement before ultimately ending without renewal in July 2025. Spotify chose not to renew its reported $20 million contract, and the company's head of podcast monetization publicly referred to the couple as grifters when the partnership concluded. The Archewell Foundation reportedly faced a documented seven-figure deficit. The A's Ever brand saw its U.S. web traffic nearly cut in half within 4 months. The operation is contracting while the baseline costs remain unchanged. The $3 million annual requirement is becoming increasingly difficult to support through the revenue the business is actually generating. At the same time, the title, the operation's most valuable commercial asset, faces the possibility of future action from the individual who may eventually hold authority over it. This is why Meghan's reported consideration of legal action regarding any potential title removal is not fundamentally about symbolism, protocol, or personal dignity. At its core, it is a financial calculation. The title itself is tied directly to revenue. Removing it would not merely alter how Meghan is addressed. It would affect the commercial value proposition underlying every business relationship built around the existence of that title. Legal action in that scenario would represent an effort to protect a commercial asset through the courts against an institution that argues it possesses the authority to remove it. Whether such an effort would ultimately succeed is a separate question from whether it would be pursued. The Crown's authority over titles is broad and constitutionally established. Historically, legal challenges against royal prerogative decisions in this area have not tended to favor plaintiffs. Courts are generally reluctant to intervene where the crown has long exercised authority without meaningful challenge. Yet the attempt itself would be extraordinary by modern standards. A duchess taking legal action against the institution she married into over its authority to revoke a title it originally granted would generate enormous media attention, controversy, and debate. Questions about the monarchy's authority, accountability, and constitutional powers would dominate public discussion. It is not the type of situation any palace communications team would want to navigate at the beginning of a new reign. The possibility of legal action therefore becomes a pressure point in its own right, regardless of whether that action would ultimately prevail. According to Bauer's sourcing, William understands this calculation. He understands the commercial framework that has been built around the Sussex brand. He has reportedly received advice regarding the legal implications, and he has reached his decision fully aware of the commercial consequences that decision could have for his brother's operation. In Bauer's framing, that is exactly what ruthless means here. Not emotional, not impulsive, not driven by anger, but deliberate, calculated, and made with full knowledge of the likely outcomes. Before we get to Looney, there is one additional detail from Bauer's reporting worth examining, a point involving Camilla that has generated considerable discussion of its own. Bauer cites sources who reportedly believed Meghan exercised what one individual described as an almost hypnotic influence over Harry. The phrase recorded in Bauer's book, and attributed to those sources rather than to Bauer himself, was that Meghan had brainwashed Harry. That is exceptionally strong language. Bauer is careful to make clear that this characterization comes from his sources and not from his own personal assessment. The palace has not publicly challenged the claim. What it reveals about how certain individuals inside the institution viewed the relationship dynamic is fairly direct, and it offers additional context for understanding the institutional response to the Sussex departure. Not merely anger over what occurred, but a particular interpretation of how it occurred. Now let's bring in Andrew Lowney's research because it provides the historical comparison that Bauer's sources explicitly reference when explaining the reasoning behind William's position. Lowney spent nearly 20 years researching lesser-known members of the royal family, the figures who exist on the edges of the institution rather than at its ceremonial center. His research into Prince Andrew's trajectory, particularly the carefully managed approach adopted by the palace once Andrew's most serious public controversies could no longer be contained, provides the case study that people around William consistently return to when explaining the reasoning behind his current position. The theory that carries weight within palace circles, and one that Lowney's research into lesser-known royals helps illuminate, is that Charles made a quiet personal promise to his mother, the late Queen, regarding Andrew's future. The objective was not complete exclusion, it was management, to keep Andrew within a controlled framework rather than cast him out entirely, to maintain a structure that could limit the damage he might cause while avoiding the kind of complete rupture that would have required difficult public explanations. Royal Lodge, the financial arrangements, the continued visibility of Beatrice and Eugenie within the broader royal orbit. Within this interpretation, these are not signs of rehabilitation. They are components of a containment strategy, not restoration, not a rebuilding of trust, but management, keeping someone close enough that their actions can be monitored and, where possible, influenced, keeping family members connected to the institution so they do not evolve into separate and unpredictable complications for the broader royal narrative. William watched that process unfold over many years, and according to those familiar with his thinking, he watched it with increasing frustration. Publicly, his father's approach to Andrew was often framed as loyalty and compassion. Privately, however, it repeatedly generated reputational damage with no obvious endpoint. Each time Andrew appeared at a family event, even a relatively minor one, even one that could reasonably be described as a private family matter, the controversy returned, the story reopened, the headlines resurfaced. Questions that the institution hoped would fade were suddenly active again. The strategy of managed containment did not truly contain the problem. It prolonged it. According to Bauer's reporting, William drew a very clear conclusion from observing the Andrew situation over the years. The halfway approach. The managed middle ground. the partial access, the maintained ambiguity. All of it is worse than a clean separation. In his view, the institution ultimately pays a greater price for unresolved liability questions than it would for a single difficult decision that brings clarity once and for all. Harry is not Andrew. The circumstances are entirely different. The nature of the controversy is different. The family history is different. The public departure from royal life is different. But according to Bauer's sourcing, the institutional logic William applies to both situations follows the same pattern. Organizations that leave difficult questions unresolved continue paying for those unresolved questions indefinitely. The costs do not disappear. They accumulate, they compound, and they become part of the institution's permanent burden. This is the framework Bauer's sources say informed both William's decision and the exact moment at which he reached it. The coronation invitation and the exclusion from the private palace reception honoring the late queen existed simultaneously. One gesture extended, one door closed, both on the same day, both directed toward the same brother. One was a public display of inclusion. The other was a private withdrawal of intimate access. William found himself extending one gesture while withholding another. And according to the reporting, the experience reinforced his belief that the middle ground, the space between full inclusion and full separation, is the least sustainable option available. The simultaneous state of being both in and out, accepted and excluded, included publicly while restricted privately. In William's reported view, that arrangement produces the worst possible institutional outcome. This is where all of the different threads begin to converge, and it is important to separate what is known from what remains interpretation. Project Thor appears to be an active operation involving Harry's team and the King's office. According to Tom Sykes' assessment, it is real. That assessment matters because Sykes spent months dismissing the idea before changing his position only after observing a pattern of coordination that became increasingly difficult to explain as coincidence. The operation's objective is straightforward: to create the conditions necessary for a meeting between father and son. Its primary obstacle remains William's position, along with the institutional risks associated with any meeting becoming public enough that William's office is forced to respond. Bauer's book presents a William who reached a specific conclusion at a specific moment. That conclusion, according to sourced reporting from senior aides connected to both offices, is one he is prepared to carry out without ambiguity, revision, or the type of emotional reconsideration that he believes contributed to the Andrew situation. Ruthless is the word used in Bauer's reporting, not a tabloid label, not hostile commentary, but a term attributed to individuals inside both the King's office and the Prince of Wales's office who have observed William's position from close range. According to that reporting, the decision may ultimately extend to Archie and Lilibet. That possibility shifts the issue beyond a dispute between adults and into territory that directly affects children who have no control over any part of the conflict. Neither palace has publicly challenged those specific claims, and that absence of contradiction remains one of the more closely watched elements of the story. The title is the key commercial lever. It is the single asset that allows the Sussex operation to function financially at its current scale and command the pricing it currently commands. Remove that asset, and the impact goes far beyond honorifics. It is not simply a change in how people are addressed. It fundamentally alters the commercial logic behind every partnership, agreement, and business venture built around the Sussex brand. The reported $3 million annual baseline becomes increasingly difficult to sustain when the brand itself is diminished. And Meghan's reported consideration of legal action over any potential removal represents the other side of that equation. An effort to use the courts to defend an asset that the Crown maintains, it has the constitutional authority to revoke. Sitting between all of these competing forces is a window, a very specific window created by Charles's health situation. And it is precisely that window that Project Thor appears designed to use before it closes. The reality is that the opportunity created by Charles's circumstances does not remain open forever. No matter how carefully coordinated an operation may be, it cannot alter that basic fact. The institution continues moving in one direction. the commercial operation continues facing contraction. Signals of reconciliation continue to accumulate without yet producing a confirmed meeting, and William waits. According to Bauer's sourcing, he waits having already reached his conclusion at a specific moment on a specific day. He waits for the point at which that decision becomes his alone to implement, for the moment when the crown passes, and when the full constitutional authority that accompanies it passes as well. So what do you make of all of this? Can Project Thor actually succeed? Can it produce a genuine meeting between father and son before William becomes king, and before the institutional calculation changes in a way that may be permanent and irreversible? And if William ultimately chooses to remove those titles, including those of Archie and Lilibet, do you think public opinion would support that decision? Or would it become one of the defining controversies of the earliest years of his reign? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to Hollywood Today so you never miss what we cover next. And if you appreciate this kind of detailed analysis, the like button helps keep the channel going. We'll see you in the next one. And given how many moving pieces remain active right now, Project Thor, Bauer's book, the title debate, and the narrow window created by Charles's health, the next chapter in this story may arrive sooner than many people expect.